Are you about to make the wrong decision for your IT infrastructure? In this video, I'm going to help you understand the difference between cloud and on-premise IT infrastructure and what is best for your business. Hello, and welcome to this video series that helps you navigate critical IT decisions and use IT services to your advantage. I'm Justin Eckstein, and I bring about 2 decades of IT experience to the table, about half of which has been spent deep in the world of managed IT services. A lot of businesses are having a really hard time navigating the cloud and their on-premise infrastructure, and oftentimes even understanding key differences between cloud and on-premise IT is a struggle. So today, we're going to look at the key differences and considerations between the two. So let's start by outlining the differences in general infrastructure. A lot of people tend to ask me, what is best? Is it the cloud or is it keeping things on premise? And unfortunately, the answer truly is that it depends. And that's what we're going to dive into today. But there's a lot of variables to take into account here. Things like your business strategy, where you want to go, where you are and where you have been, where your data lives, and also just things like your budget and just general strategy and the software that you work with. All these things come into play. So let's just kind of dive into some of the key items here and the key differences, I should say, between cloud and on-premise. So one would be the location of the data and the infrastructure. With on-premise, we're generally talking about something like your own physical location. That could be like your office or your offices that you have your equipment and your data residing in. And the cloud is generally someone else's office, right? Or a data center. You're basically renting somebody else's space and equipment. So it's yours versus theirs. And that kind of goes into the next point of on-premise infrastructure is generally something that you own, or maybe you're financing, right, to eventually own it, versus something in the cloud, which is generally you're renting it. You're paying a fee to use it. And it's not something that you would really ever actually own. Another key difference to think about is a deployment scenario. You know, when you're talking about on-premise infrastructure, it's generally slower to implement than it would be something like the cloud. And that's just because the cloud is kind of readily accessible. You can go to a website, you can sign up, you can just start using it right away. When you're thinking about on-premise infrastructure, generally you're talking about equipment that you might have to buy or lease or something. And so there's an ordering process. You have to spec it out the right size. It's slower for that to actually come into place. You have to set it all up. Plug it all in, versus the cloud's a little bit more readily available. That also kind of bleeds into the next point, which would be the scalability. So on-premise infrastructure is generally not as easily scalable as maybe the cloud. And that's just because of resources. So when you think about, let's say you bought a server, right? And suddenly maybe you need to go get a new software package, like a new accounting software, and it requires more oomph, more speed. That will potentially mean that you might have to add resources to that server. Maybe it's not big enough or fast enough. Maybe you have to get a whole new one. In the cloud, you can just kind of size it the way you need, so it's a lot faster, and it can grow with you or shrink with you a lot faster. Accessibility is obviously key as well. So on-premise infrastructure, you generally have to think about, where it is. So maybe that's your office, right? To access it, you either have to be in the office or you might have to use something like a VPN for network access to it. The cloud is generally going to be more accessible, and that can be both a pro and a con. It's good for you that it's flexible and you can get to it from home or what have you, but it might also be a con if it's sensitive information, because that might mean that it's just as easy for something like an attacker to access it, right? They have the same access to a lot of the cloud systems that we do. This all kind of depends on your business, right? So a lot of the times when we're talking about on-premise versus cloud and what's the right direction for a business, we have to take a lot of things into consideration. Oftentimes a business that just kind of knows what they're doing, they're not expecting any major changes, something like on-premise infrastructure can make a lot of sense because it's more of an investment. You buy it, you know what you're going to be doing for the next 5 to 10 years. You don't expect any changes. That can really allow you to stretch your dollar a little bit further. because you eventually or right away own the equipment. Versus the cloud, you're continually paying for it, but that also opens up the possibility for rapid change. When you're renting something, you can quickly change it to something else. You have to kind of take those things into consideration when you're figuring out what makes the most sense from a technology perspective for you. One of the next things to consider is really the cost difference between on-premise and cloud infrastructure. In a lot of situations, it seems that the cloud can appear to be really affordable, especially if you're just going to maybe sign up for a certain software suite and that's really all you need and it kind of does everything for you. In a lot of ways, that can be kind of an affordable model. You're not necessarily locked into some giant infrastructure cost. It gives you that flexibility. So for a lot of small businesses that aren't really sure what the future may hold for them, there might be a lot of growth, there might not be a lot of growth. Something that's a little bit more fluid, like the cloud, that can package a lot of technology in one solution can be really attractive. But the cloud is not always less expensive. Sometimes it's actually more expensive, but maybe more capable. When you think about a bunch of servers, for example, in some cases it's cheaper to buy that infrastructure and have it on premise versus having the equivalent servers in the cloud. If you're paying monthly, can really add up, but can also add some technology advantages for you. So, on premise, you're generally looking at a higher upfront expense, unless you want to, lease or finance it, right? And then cloud is generally something that you have some kind of a monthly subscription and a lower upfront cost. So that's generally a financial difference there that's worth considering. One thing that I think a lot of people tend to overlook is that with on-premise infrastructure, you tend to pay the same amount, really regardless of how much of it you end up utilizing. Versus the cloud is a little bit more, pay for what you get or what you use. And so in the event that you get rid of a software suite or maybe you need to add a software suite, the cloud can more easily fluctuate the cost with you versus on-premise. It's just kind of, you already made that investment. Maybe you have to add to that investment, or maybe you've over-invested. Can't really get that money back though. There are a lot of businesses out there that might rapidly expand, or maybe they have really seasonal and temporary like employees, or just busy times of year where they add staff. In those cases, the flexibility of a cloud or subscription type service makes a lot of sense, because you can pay for what you need when you really need it and then kind of scale it back maybe during a slow time of year and kind of bring some of that cost down. Another key point to consider would be the security and the control capabilities between on-premise IT infrastructure and the cloud. One of the things that when people are looking to move to the cloud, that I like to talk about is your data. At the end of the day, when it comes to technology in your business, your data is probably what matters the most. Could be your list of clients, maybe a software package, or design files, or banking information, all sorts of things, right? And that's critical to your business. If it was to be lost or stolen, that could be a huge problem. And so we have to think about how that gets impacted between these two scenarios. When you have on-premise infrastructure, you generally have full control of where your data is. You know exactly where it's sitting, and you can limit who has access to that data. The cloud is a little bit different because you're putting it on somebody else's infrastructure that they've designed and put together. So you don't necessarily know physically where it's located or who might actually have access to the data in the back end. There's a little bit of a trust factor that comes into play there. So you really have to understand the terms and conditions when using a cloud service, and understand what that really means for you and your business and your data. There are some data residency concerns, and if it's very sensitive information, you really just need to know where it sits, who has access to it, and how it can be controlled and backed up, and those kinds of things. In some cases with the cloud, I think it's worth noting that you can unlock additional security controls that might be harder or more expensive to implement when using an on-premise solution. And some of that kind of has to do with kind of the shared model of the cloud, right? So when you think about some of the really advanced security controls out there, it can kind of add up for on-premise infrastructure in some cases to get the latest, greatest things. You might have to buy a lot of licensing up front and implement a whole bunch of different tools to kind of get that same level of security versus the cloud. Because some of it's shared and designed very specifically for what they're doing, in a lot of ways you can leverage some really advanced tools, even as a small business, and at just a fraction of the price by just paying for a few licenses that you really need. So when you think about it that way, something like a small business, the cloud can actually give you a really nice security blanket. Yes, your data is moving somewhere else, but it can unlock a lot of security controls that might otherwise be out of reach in a lot of ways, mostly just because of licensing or expertise to manage and implement. You can kind of rent somebody else's and get by and really unlock a lot of those controls. So at the end of the day, I think that the key things to understand are that there are pros and cons to both cloud and on-premise deployments. There is really no clear winner of one architecture being better than the other. It truly depends on your situation, your business requirements, and your budget. If you take the time to outline your requirements and think about what's most important to you, the choice will become clear. Thanks for watching today's video. If you would like to learn more, click the link in the description.